So, good morning. My name is Rick Sterling, and I'm the president of Western IM. I'd like to thank you all for attending the webinar today about the shared drive cleanup capabilities of our Whisper tool. Those of you who attended the last webinar about Whisper and the physical information inventory got the story of how the tool was created. And although it started out as a physical inventory product, it's really turned into a pretty versatile tool for content inventory in both physical and electronic form. Just before we get rolling, and I am going to kind of set the tone after we introduce Troy. Troy will be on here with us today as well. Troy's a partner at Western IM and also our lead developer. So he is of the two of us, he is definitely the technical guy on the webinar today. So first, a quick note for the technical folks in the crowd, because there are always some of those. You're unmuted.
Hello, everyone. Actually, too, just as Rick gets started here, I wanted to point out one quick thing about Zoom. I know some people were having some issues with what they could see on their Zoom screen. Just wanted to point out quick at the top, there's some view options next to the green bar. Underneath there, you can find ways to maximize and fit to screen as well. So I'll get back to you, Rick.
Well, thanks, Troy. So for the technical people in the crowd, just a quick note that Whisper is actually written in .NET, and it uses RESTful services, so it's a really kind of modern architecture in the application. It has an API, and it's really fast and easy to use, of course. Whisper's passive, and we're going to talk more about that throughout the presentation. So it doesn't really negatively impact your users or the IT group in the organization you're in. Generally implemented as a SaaS, software as a service kind of solution, but also functions really well on premise if required. So as Troy mentioned, there's a QA. I think Troy mentioned that there's a QA button in your screen. So if you want to ask questions, you can certainly do that. We'll get to those questions at the end of the presentation today. If we run out of time, though, for any reason at the end of the presentation, then we'll get back to everybody individually and answer those questions for you. We're going to keep the shared drive cleanup today, but there are follow-on webinars that speak to the other features in the product. So the other future webinars are going to be SharePoint and Cloud. That'll be you'll be getting an email very soon for that one. Classification and reorganization, and migration. So make sure you sign up for the ones that you're most interested in, and get a full vision of the Whisper tool as you go forward. So I bet if I could ask you all in person today, if you had a clean shared drive, there would be silence, and very few, if any, that would be responding with a wholehearted yes. If I told you all that content is growing at an alarming pace, I'm pretty sure you'd all agree. So what do? Cleaning up the shared drive seems to me to be a compound problem. It's made up of we don't know what we have, and IT doesn't have any rules to use for a cleanup. So it's not really their fault. Some of you might even say that legal told them to keep everything just in case, and I have heard that. I know it sounds kind of wild and crazy, but that's certainly things I've heard. We can probably couple that with not wanting to rock the boat for the users or IT along the way as well. So I hear a lot in my travels that drive space is cheap. I know it really isn't. I am an IT guy by trade. If we use the kind of enterprise hardware we actually need to use and factor in the effort and cost of backing it all up and managing it. So even if it's in the cloud, out of sight and out of mind, we have to pay for the space we use. And eventually that will cost us quite a bit of money because exponential growth is going to continue. So the bottom line is we have to inventory the electronic information that we have now, somehow add classification to it in some understandable way, so we can actually be allowed to do disposition in the end of the project. So a solid process should allow us to push for the sign-off at the end of the cleanup project and allow us to dispose of a whole lot of stuff. That's the hope anyway. So let's even hope for up to 50% disposition on what we find out on that shared drive. End result will reduce operating costs while freeing up space of those drives and even assist the users in finding the things they're looking for faster because there's not so much stuff out on the shared drive. Sounds like a win-win-win to me. And as a side benefit for those of you that have to deal with the increasing numbers and complexity of Freedom of Information requests, a clean source of truth and much less e-stuff would give us some long-term benefits. For the U.S. attendees today, there's quite a few on today from the U.S. Less is always more when it comes to risk of keeping things too long, may be discoverable. Couple that with privacy concerns like the GDPR and the new California CCPA legislation, it kind of adds up to needing to do something about cleanup. Wait, you say. I thought we were just cleaning up a shared drive. Yes. But there's a lot of reasons why we might want to do that. So we might want to get rid of a lot of e-stuff on our shared drive, as much as 50%. That might be the simple truth of the cleanup project. Maybe we need to know what we have now, including any pockets of personally identifiable information, and dispose of information that has met its disposition, or just doesn't need to be there, like dark data. Example would be computer logs, that kind of thing. Or we might want to selectively dedupe the shared drive. That might be our kind of mandatory reason. We have a new classification system maybe, and the folder structure that we want to shift the shared drive into needs to be put in place. Or we're moving to a new EDRMS platform, don't care which one, and we need to clean up the information, so we migrate only what we need and not forklift the whole thing into the drive. So maybe we will never have the budget for an EDRMS solution, but we need to manage the retention and disposition of the information on the existing shared drive behind the scenes. So I bet there's several of you on the call right now that have some other combination or permutation in mind for what would happen on a shared drive cleanup. But here's what I think a WSPR shared drive cleanup project might look like. And then we're going to go look at the WSPR features with Troy and that would help with this assignment, but actually make it possible in the end. So you saw the combinations and permutations on the screen. There's a myriad of them. But the first step in any project is to write a project charter. Get it approved through management. Once that's done, deciding on a communications plan to the business units involved would be really important. Making sure that you have a classification system and retention schedule on hand would be a really good thing to have. Whether it's current or not, you need that classification and retention information. I would also recommend trying to get a recommendation from legal or a retention on a retention for non-records. So as we all know, under 10% of the information we have is records. So what do we do with the rest? The answer for sure is not keep it forever. So pick a number like 1, 2, 3, 5 years and get it approved through management. Doesn't mean a business unit doesn't indicate they need things a bit longer, but starting with a corporately approved number would be really making a whole lot of sense. Now, you probably want to plan out what extra things your team or teams are going to look for during the project as well, since there's no reason to leave any loose change on the counter. We are going to be looking at content and working with some subject matter experts, SMEs. Anyway, so, you know, we need a plan in mind for new things we might like to know, like pockets of personally identifiable information, PII, things that should be maybe on legal hold, things that might be vital records. You're also going to find dark data things like log files that IT can help you flag as well. And there's a new type of security classification maybe in your organization since you last looked at the shared drive. And, you know, we could keep that in mind so that teams can be looking for information whose security might need to be flagged for adjustment during the project. We should be familiar with the organization's goals and might want to tag certain areas of content for a specific business purpose as well during the project. Information governance is really important in a project like this, and we should include the input from various groups of folks in the organization. That would be risk, legal, IT, security, privacy, and records and information management folks along the way as we get started with the project. And of course, one of the very important things about a project like this is acquiring the right software tools to assist in the project. In the case of a shared drive cleanup, I believe this is really essential. Planning, planning, planning are the keywords for any project. And now to WSPR and how it will, this valuable project that you're going to do on the shared drive cleanup, how we can get rid of that rot, that's redundant, obsolete, and transitory information on those shared drives. WSPR is a passive tool. I just want to reiterate that again. While Troy gets set up, and while Troy's getting organized, just a couple of things, again, about the passive nature of the WSPR tool. So it brings in metadata and folder structure, but not actual documents. So this assists the information management professionals in a whole bunch of different ways. It alleviates some of the security considerations that might come into play if we had actually ingested the documents themselves. And it does allow us to accomplish the project goals without troubling the IT and the users as we work. So we're not actually moving information around in the shared drive, but passively in WSPR as we work on our project. So you can get a job done with your team on your own time frame without being impacted by the normal time constraints that always affect us in these situations.
Great.
So Troy, I just wanted to say that if you could maybe take us to the WSPR tool, which you have, and kind of give us a bit of a tour around what the screen is all about.
Yep, sure. So last time we looked more at the physical stuff, and we really benefited from our kind of flat view of our basic architecture we like to look at in WSPR. And for the most part, we like to consider things as container content type of relationships. In the physical world, we talked about that last week where we had boxes and such. But in this case, we're going to be looking at containers and contents when it applies to a shared drive. And as everyone's familiar, the idea of we have folders that contain documents within them. So for most of today's demonstration, that's kind of the relationship we're looking at when we look at flat views. So for example here, just what we're looking at here, I'm going to look at my electronic folders. Here's a flat view of all my electronic folders that I've brought in, and then as well as all the electronic files. And this is kind of what we'll be focusing on today. We'll spend most of our time in our electronic tab where we get a more familiar view of our folder structures and our sources and how we are applying some of the metadata. But I'll come back here to do some searches and stuff later on. So this is where we'll be spending most of our time, is in the electronic tab, where we can see the layout here just to understand what we're looking at. Essentially, our left-hand side contains our electronic profiles. Electronic profiles are a location on our shared drive. Sometimes we'll break down shared drives into subcategories, as well as things in future webinars. We'll be looking at our SharePoint and things like OneDrive. I've got a couple of sources here, but for the most part, we'll be living on the shared drive, and particularly I'll mainly be looking at PC Troy. As Rick mentioned, as a shared drive, these are Windows folder paths. These could also be local drives as well. We've had projects where the C drive becomes our electronic profile source, and we're trying to organize those as well. Center view here is what we call our functional organizational structure, and this is essentially where we've added some valuable information to our electronic profiles on the left. And what do we see coming out the other end when we apply things like maybe a department function activity, as well as a classification associated with the documents. Right-hand side. Go ahead.
Troy, maybe you could show us too when you get a chance how we get retention and information and classification information into the WSPR tool as well.
Sure. On the right-hand side, as we're applying some of this metadata associated with the documents and folders, some of it's coming from the metadata on the Windows drive, and some of it's coming from our electronic profiles. But we'll actually take a look at our classification here. This is where we're adding quite a bit of valuable information to an electronic file on the system that might not have any more than the system data associated with it. So I have loaded up a classification structure here, a flat level. Some of the ones we'll be looking at are things like legal documents. Help me find some legal documents, help me find some HR documents. And this is the view of what we have, but we can go into a little bit more in depth of what that actually looks like. We have a classification under here. Our session in a couple of sessions from now, 2 from now, we'll do classification and retention stuff as part of the reorganization and classification webinar. But just to get a view of where this information is coming from, we have things like how long do we retain the documents for? Are they event driven kind of classifications? What are we doing at the end of it? Are we destroying them? Are you archiving? Things like that. And we've got a couple of other metadata, even just associated with the classification itself, things like legal citations and such. But these are what we want to be applying to our electronic content from on our shared drive, which otherwise would have no policies or retention associated with them. So what we'll do here is we'll come back to our electronic tab. What we'll do is we'll start kind of right from the beginning here, what we're expecting to see on a shared drive. On our shared drive, we have messes all over the place. And what I like to do is I like to start with this one. We're looking at a part of our NAS here in our office that has some sample documents that I like to use. And essentially in here, this is kind of a typical view of what we see, is that we've got all kinds of different documents in different folder structures with, you know, I've got some chat logs here. It looks like I've got a contract here. I've got some project files. And how do we add value to this? How can we reorganize and clean up our shared drive from a mess like this? So what I've done is I've created what we call an electronic profile. And we're going to start with this sample documents area of our shared drive. We always like to break down our electronic profiles to be a little bit more meaningful when we do it, but we could start higher up in our NAS, for example, our shared drive. But as we get further down, we might be able to apply some more information, and this is where we can do it. So I'm going to look at the actual electronic profile and what we've set for this one. I've right-clicked on this. We can go to Edit Profiles. We also have it in our admin menu for our electronic profiles. So let's look at that particular one I was looking at, PC Troy. And what I've done with this is I've assigned some default metadata coming from this. I know that this is coming from my NAS or this is coming from my PC. So I've actually said anything we're syncing in from this electronic profile, let's say it's coming from the shared drive. We don't know anything about the department, records category. This should be a function. In this case, we've got function or activity with it. We don't have any classification to apply to because we really don't know anything about anything that's on this drive. And this is where we can kind of our starting level. So if I actually select a document here on the left-hand side, it'll expand my right-hand side. And we can see in our functional organization, we have an unknown, an unknown, and an unknown. We didn't know where any of this stuff is. So in our new tree in the center area where we've reorganized things based on the data we've given to it, we see that that folder and file exists under the unknown part of my tree. This might not be very useful. We've had hundreds of folders here, thousands of files. How do we then add more value to this? So we've got a couple of ways we do this. Maybe at the beginning, I would have maybe broken down this a little bit further to say, I know this particular project files here. We've got a couple of project numbers. Maybe these 3 should have actually been put into a project or associated with a certain department. So we could have put some more information on this. I'll take a quick look at another drive here. I've got some spreadsheets. I'm going to look at the electronic profile here. And I believe this one I've set some, this one's actually administration and just various. So we could have started a little bit more refined in our start. So let's actually move something here. As we saw in the beginning webinar last week, we can actually change how it's functionally classified within the system. So I'm going to take one of these folders here. I'm going to say this WCO test. And here it's still under our unknown, unknown, unknown. So I'm going to say, I know what this one is. This is a crude manual way of kind of moving some things in the structure. Let's move this one to finance. And we're going to say this is, what do we got here? We're just going to say this is boards, and we're going to say it's a various boards documents here. So as I'm changing these functional classification of the folder, we're actually going to move it within our reorganized structure. I'm going to hit update here. So now if we go into our finance, boards, and various, our WCO, our WOC test here has actually been moved, quote unquote, moved in Whisper. And again, we're passive here. We didn't actually physically move it off our shared drive. We're trying to reorganize it so that we can apply more meaningful information to it. So if I actually click on this here, let's pick a file here, I can see in our new functional organization where this is actually falling under. We've got finance boards and committees, but on the left-hand side, it's taking me to where it actually existed on my shared drive. It still lives here. We haven't moved it. We haven't ingested it. We've just put some more information to the documents within this one folder. Second kind of way we can do this here is we can actually do drag and drop. So say we have some files here in the top level. I'm going to take one of these, say this test document. We can actually drag and drop documents around as well. So we can have individual moves based on drag and drops. We can do this at the folder level or and drag those into any of the kind of activities on the right side to move folders around. This is just prompting our bulk move functionality in Whisper. This is the same bulk move that we do in the flat view. It just helps us keep an audit of what's kind of been moving around the system. So I'm actually going to move it into WCO testing. So here we can see our test document now has been moved under the WCO testing. And there, as it's gotten moved there, it's been put into that area and then also gotten that function activity associated with it because that folder's been classified in that area of our organization. So let's get a little bit further down here. So the last two ways we just looked at were more of manual ways. Okay, I know this document or this folder has this information. How can I do that? But how can we go a step further to put some automation behind this? And this is where our data rules engine comes in. To explain this briefly without getting too technical is basically we can give the system a couple of rules or any number of rules to say, how do we make decisions on documents with our subject matter experts, for example? They say, I know I've got contracts in our shared drive. In this area, you've got some contracts out there. Help me identify which ones those are. And what does that mean? So a contract might have some other information with it. It might be a different document type within our Whisper system. Here we've just got generic electronic profile or electronic files as a content type. We might want to make that a contract content type. That means we can have different data associated with it. Or all the contracts maybe are a certain classification. So let me open up our data rules engine to take a look at how we're going to find some contracts in our electronic profile. So this is just a basic view of how we're applying the rules. We won't go technically into how we build the rules. In the top left here, I've hit the drop down. These data rules are a couple of built-in rules that we have within the system, as well as some configurable ones based on regular expressions or helping you find some dates and things like that. That's a technical level. We're just going to apply the rules that I've already created. So here I've got a couple of rules where I'm going to say, get me the contract types within the system. This is the rule that I'm applying, get contract type, and I'm going to say anything that meets this rule, I want you to apply the contract or the content type to it. So this rule is saying if it's a contract, if you've identified it as a contract, set the content type, as well as mapping classification. So that content type we know always is legal 01 in our system. We have a one-to-one match here. Maybe it's not, but in this case, we're going to assume we got a one-to-one match. So we're going to apply the classification to it as well. So these two rules are what I'm mainly going to be looking at. We can apply these per profile, electronic profile, or we can apply it overall to anything that comes into the system. I've applied one of these rules to get the name of the document. By default, Whisper scans in the name plus the extension. In this case, I've made a rule to say, just get me the name without the extension. So we can see everything in our system has come in without an extension applied to the content name. At the bottom here, we can actually specify a sample file. And this is where we're getting some of the data on the right-hand side to say, if this rule is met, instead of running the electronic profile sync again, give me a sample file so that I know some sample data that could be coming out. If this rule was run against this file, what value would I have gotten? Here's one for file size where we see the actual file size rule returning a value if it was run against this particular file. Just a quick note on filtering. Whisper is really handy when it comes to filtering. We've built it in that it's quick inline configurable filtering that returns some results. So I can say, I want to show me everything that applies to a certain profile, for example. Show me all the ones that apply to the profile that we're looking at today, or just ones that are specifically to this current profile. And same with filtering based on text as well. Okay, so let's hop back to, oops, the filtering is still running. We're gonna hop back to the electronic profile here and take a look at how these rules have now run. We've run these prior to this, but we're gonna see what has actually come out of our contracts. I know that there's a couple places in here that have a couple contract types, but I'm just gonna drill down to one and we're gonna look at what it looks like in Whisper, how we can identify them in our flat views, and what particular piece of information got applied to it, specific to our classification. So I'm going to look, I believe under WIM phase 3 here, we actually got a contracts folder. And based on my rules, it's actually found these 5 documents here and actually identified them as a contract. So I'm going to click on one. We see there's still an unknown and unknown. We didn't specify it was changing any of the functional classification, just the content type and the classification. So from the left-hand side, we knew we got some contracts. Within Whisper here now, we've got a couple of the icons here are different. This is actually specifying these are contract content types up here on the right. And we've also, so we've applied the content type and we've also applied a specific legal classification. This one is event-driven. This one's set that personal information flag. We know that Legal 01's classification in our classification editor we saw earlier, Legal 01 is considered personal information by default, so it's also flagged them as personal information. And we put a security level as restricted on that one. And this is all based on us saying anything you found as a contract is a Legal 01 classification. Just want to quickly jump over to our flat view to see how we can manage some of this content as well in a kind of flat view. So I'm going to hop over to my content tab here in the top left and look for these same contracts and how we can do maybe some bulk searching or some bulk updating as well in the flat view. Tree structures are great, but sometimes we want to look at multiple areas within these folders, and that in some of our flat views helps as well. So let's hop over here. So I'm going to say, we're just looking at everything right now. I'm going to say, let's filter again. This is one of our filters that we like to use. We're going to say, let's only look at our contract ones. And here we can say we got a bunch of them that were scanned in from PC Troy. We got a couple in the other ones as well here, but we're going to focus on the ones that we brought in here. And you can see, it looks like I've got a couple of duplicates maybe in here as well, but we got everything kind of specified as Legal 01. And I've manually put in a couple of event dates on these, and we can see where we're starting to get projected dates on this. This projected date will be focused on in the classification webinar coming up, but just to get a preview of how we're applying a classification, we're getting some policies associated with those, maybe some retention periods, and how we can get some projected dates at the other end. I just mentioned the idea of the duplicates. Whisper can also deal with duplicates. And the way we like to deal with duplicates is we have actually a duplicates tab. Just like when we broke down our electronic profiles by areas that we're focusing on based on maybe some predefined functional organization within certain areas of our shared drive, we also like to run our duplicate checking against those particular profiles. It's going to hit the drop down here. On the left-hand side in my electronic tab, here's my shared drive areas, and I'm going to pick PC Troy. We can also run against other areas we've not created profiles for by browsing to the folder as well. But we're going to focus on here. This is already run. I'm just going to leave this up because it's already run. And here we can see actually those contracts. So we've run this against PC Troy, and it's found 6 files here. And these are those contracts that I actually scanned in. Personally, when I made this, I actually physically copied and just renamed them. So the contents of the file are actually exactly the same. Default deduping within Whisper, is the contents of the files have to be exactly the same. Naming or locations of the drive or anything like that isn't taken into consideration. It's the physical content of the file has to be the same. So I copied these ones and just renamed them, so it found these 5 contracts as duplicates. Now, as a passive tool, we try to keep it passive. We don't do this, but moving on to kind of what we can do to do this cleanup. So let's focus on a dedupe and how we'd actually clean up a drive if we wanted to physically do something with what was there. For the technical people in the crowd, what we like to do is we decouple the duplicates and we set them aside. So when we run a dedupe or a move, we actually set the files aside in the same folder structure in a given location so that the duplicates can then be merged back or still browsed in the same folder structure as they were in before. This helps us limit the risk of doing something we didn't want to do. It allows users to be able to get to those files that might have been located in a different place where we've deduped it, and they were used to browsing to the old folder structure where that file duplicate was. We won't run this now, but I'll kind of show you what it does. On the left-hand side, I've checked off a whole bunch, all the checks I've considered as duplicates. And when I run this move, we can actually, that moves it to the side. So we browse to a folder or give it a folder path. And when we run the dedupe, it'll actually, I've got a duplicates area here. Confirm this. If we run this, this will actually move the duplicates. You can see it's going through. And as we move them, we also clean them up in Whisper as well. So if the duplicate has been deduped from our source, we also clean it up in Whisper as well. Okay, so that would have cleaned it up. So if I actually go into my contracts folder here, I'll just refresh this. I see I only have one contract left. And that's because those other ones were just copies that I made. So we actually go into Whisper here as well. If we browse down to where those were in my contracts folder, if I re-expand this, we actually only still have one in Whisper. So our dedupe has been done on the source and on the Whisper data. In future webinars, I believe the last one of this series, we'll actually look at the migration and what we can do with now our cleaned up shared drive. Because right now we're still living within Whisper. We've applied some classifications. Maybe we generate some reports on some content on our shared drive that has met disposition, for example, and we can generate some reports here. I'll just quickly generate one of my folder reports. I'll just quickly show what some of these look like. And these are reports that we can say, hey, we've got to get this to the department to say they need to sign off on removing this from the shared drive, for example. So here's that one contract in this. I had that one folder selected. And this is a generic report I put together where I've got a sign box here that they've got to sign off that I'm going to delete this one file if it was 2020 or 2035. Just a brief look at that. We looked at some reporting in the last one as well. And these are just Excel files that you can manage outside of the Whisper application as well to send to those who need sign off. So that kind of wraps up the cleanup of our shared drive. We've looked at things, our sources, what's in there, what can we identify as in there. We've applied some rules. We've done some manual cleanup where we've moved some files around or moved some folders within our new functional organizational structure. We've deduped, we've cleaned up the drive with duplicates. It also cleaned up our Whisper application. And then at the end of the day, after we've run and applied rules with everything we've done in Whisper, we've got a clean set of data here on the right-hand side. Obviously, we would want to do some more organization and get some more stuff out of unknown, unknown, unknown. But we've got a clean set of data with classification applied to it that we can report on and move forward with our shared drive. That might be what we'll do in our later webinar with the migration. Rick, do you want to take over from here? Do you have a couple of more lines you'd like to wrap up here, or has any questions come in? This might be a good time as well if anybody has questions to write them in chat here, and we can start addressing those as we're getting closer to the end. I'm just trying to bring up chat. Okay, I've got to unmute Rick. One sec. There you go, Rick. You should be able to unmute now.
They mute me all the time in the office, everybody, so it's a normal process for me. Sorry. Well, thanks, Troy. That was great. So I just wanted to kind of recap, particularly for people with very large electronic information holdings in their organizations, because there's no way you're going to bring in probably an entire shared drive at one time you're going to work with SMEs in a given business unit, bring in that chunk of information at one time, work through it, go through the processes Troy outlined it in what he showed today, and kind of clean it up piece by piece. And not to be repetitive, but it is passive. So we're not bugging the users, we're not bugging IT, we're just actually working through this with the right people, trying to get the job done and what we need to do done and cleaned up. So it makes for, we're working on our project time, not necessarily where the timing is wrong in a lot of those situations with other people worried about what we're up to. The security is good because we haven't actually got the documents. We didn't really say this before, but when we only have metadata and not documents, if you're in WSPR and you have actually access to that area where the documents are, you could actually bring up a document and look at it. Any people working on the team that don't have access cannot do that. We're always working with the network security to make sure that only people that can see those kinds of things are able to do that. So budget has always been an issue for many of you. I know there's never enough money to get everything done. You always had a lot of projects you might want to do, but the budget really shut down the effort that you wanted to put in. WSPR was really designed to be a very inexpensive tool as those things go. So hopefully you don't have to wait for 3 budget years from now to actually get something done and make a difference in the organization. So I think that's very important. So I wanted to thank everybody. I don't see any questions at this point. So thank everybody for attending the WSPR Shared Drive Cleanup webinar today. And I hope you've seen what a great job WSPR might do in assisting you to inventory and clean up those existing shared drives in the organization. Suffice to say that WSPR is fast and very comprehensive. It can help with inventory for both physical and electronic information, reorganization, and so many other styles of project, like a large merger or acquisition. Anybody that's been through one of those with the mountains of information that comes from somebody you may have acquired would know what a job that might be. WSPR certainly could deal with that as well. We hope that you'll attend the follow-on webinars coming up for the more electronic capabilities of WSPR tool. And next one highlights the mapping of data in SharePoint. I bet all of you will say that you've got SharePoint lurking around your organization somewhere or other. I think it's very important to be looking at that whole SharePoint side of things to make sure that we have the SharePoint under control in the background in all of your organizations. So that one I think will be really important. And of course, classification and reorganization is the one after that, and then migration. And I think for those of you that want to do a whole lot of different types of projects, that migration one will be really important to see as well. So again, thank you all very much for coming to the webinar. Please feel free to send us email if you want to talk further about anything you saw today to our sales@westernim.com, and we will get back to you right away and help as much as we can. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a great week.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.